When you sit down in the driver's seat of a car, um, there's this incredibly comforting expectation of how things work.
Right. It's a totally closed system.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's obedient. You turn the steering wheel left, and the tires go left. You press the brake, and this 2-ton machine just stops.
You feel completely safe because cause and effect are mechanically linked.
Yeah, you are sitting behind this dashboard of levers and pedals, and it gives you direct, absolute control over your reality right in that moment.
Until you step out of the car.
Exactly, until you look at the dashboard of global power. Because suddenly, that direct link between cause and effect is completely severed.
Yeah, you pull a lever on the global stage, say, threatening a military strike or, injecting billions into a currency market, and you just have to hope it actually forces the outcome you want.
Right, and sometimes it works. But sometimes that lever just snaps off in your hand entirely, and you are left hurtling forward with no brakes.
Which honestly perfectly frames the theme we are unpacking today. We're going to be looking at leverage and control. Specifically, how people in power utilize extreme leverage to force outcomes, and what happens when that fragile illusion of control completely shatters.
And we are doing this by connecting some seemingly disparate dots from the August 3, 2026 edition of a newsletter called The Daily Grind News by Bill Davis.
Yeah, we've got an incredibly dense stack of reporting to go through here today, covering everything from international military standoffs to local domestic tragedies. So our mission in this deep dive is to find the hidden connective tissue between all these headlines.
And we should probably put a quick disclaimer out there right at the top.
Yes, absolutely. So for you, the listener, we want to explicitly remind you that this source material contains politically charged content. And as always, we will not take any sides.
Right, our only job here is to neutrally impart the facts and the viewpoints that were presented in the original text. We just want to allow you to understand the landscape without any bias from us. So with that out of the way, let's look at the first massive lever being pulled on the geopolitical stage. Donald Trump has officially paused a planned military strike on Iran.
And we really need to emphasize the word paused here because this is definitely not a de-escalation.
No, far from it. The announcement came via a Truth Social post, all caps, and it explicitly framed this halt as temporary.
Right. The pause is there to allow Tehran and other Middle Eastern nations time to finalize the framework of a deal.
And the demands attached to this deal are pretty sweeping, most notably the immediate reopening of the Strait of Hormuz and a complete end to Iran's nuclear threat.
But the regional dynamics going on behind this pause are just as fascinating as the threat itself.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the reporting indicates that Israel is actually supporting this temporary halt.
Yeah, and on top of that, Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman directly urged the administration to hold off on immediate military action.
I mean, nobody wants a wider regional conflict that could just engulf the entire Middle East. Meanwhile, Iran is not just sitting by quietly, writer. They have publicly identified specific U.S. and Israeli energy targets that they would hit if the U.S. actually strikes.
So Washington is out there warning that the U.S. military is, quote, locked and loaded with power unseen since World War II, but they haven't actually fired.
It's like a high-stakes geopolitical poker game. It's like one player shows all their cards showing they have this massive military might, but they keep their chips on the table just to force the other guy to fold.
Or like compressing a massive industrial spring. You lock all this kinetic energy into place, everyone can clearly see it, everyone is terrified of it snapping, but you just don't release it.
Yeah, because attention itself does the work.
Exactly. The threat is the policy. The editor of the newsletter points out a defining characteristic of this administration, which is that a final executive decision can instantly pivot into a high-pressure negotiating tactic.
Right. By demonstrating that you are willing to walk right up to the absolute brink of a catastrophic military conflict, you generate immense diplomatic leverage.
It acts as this invisible force pressing down on the negotiators, the oil markets, the region's leaders. It just keeps everyone totally off balance.
But military might isn't the only way to apply that kind of crushing pressure. I mean, if a country can't get what it wants with missiles, it often turns to money.
Which brings us to an entirely different kind of lever, the economic one.
Right. The U.S. and Japan have teamed up for their first coordinated currency intervention since 2011, and they are stepping in to rescue the Japanese yen.
Which has hit its weakest level since 1986.
Yeah, the details on this are wild. Market participants estimate Japan has already burned through nearly $59 billion
Yeah.
just buying up their own currency to prop up its value.
And now the U.S. is stepping in to help.
And I love this highly specific detail from the reporting. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent was photographed holding a handwritten note that just read, "Buy Japanese yen JPY 5 to 10 bill."
Just a casual $5 to $10 million.
Right. But I have a fundamental question here. Why go to these extremes? We are talking about two of the largest free market economies on Earth. Why not just let the free market dictate what the yen is worth?
Well, to understand why it matters, you have to look at the stakes and the vacuum effect of American monetary policy.
Okay, lay it out for us.
Currently, U.S. interest rates are pretty high, and when U.S. rates are high, global investors flock to the U.S. dollar because they get a better, safer return.
So that acts like a giant vacuum, just sucking capital out of places like Japan.
Exactly, which weakens the yen. And a weak yen is devastating for Japan domestically because every single thing they import, energy, food, raw materials, it suddenly costs vastly more.
It just imports crushing inflation directly into their economy.
Right. But as to why Washington is actively intervening instead of letting the free market handle it, it comes down to U.S. Treasury bonds.
Oh, because Japan is one of the largest foreign holders of U.S. debt.
Bingo. If Japan had to fund this massive $59 billion currency intervention completely on their own, how do they get that cash?
They'd have to sell off something valuable, like U.S. Treasuries.
Right. They would have to dump billions of dollars worth of U.S. Treasury bonds onto the open market. And if you suddenly flood the global market with U.S. bonds, the price of those bonds plummets.
And when bond prices drop, the yields, the interest rates, they spike.
Exactly. So Japan, just trying to save its own currency, could accidentally cause American mortgage rates and corporate borrowing costs to skyrocket overnight. It would rattle the broader financial markets.
Wow, it would create this massive doom loop.
Yeah, so to prevent that broader financial instability, the U.S. and Japan are utilizing Federal Reserve liquidity tools.
So the Fed essentially lends dollars to Japan, they intervene, and the U.S. bond market remains undisturbed. That is an extreme lever being pulled right there.
It really is.
But, we don't even have to look overseas to see this leverage dynamic at play. It's happening right in Washington, D.C.
Where the weapons of choice are Senate votes and century-old laws.
Exactly. And again, just to remind you, the listener, we are looking at this next segment entirely neutrally. We're just examining how the government and politicians pull these domestic levers.
Right, just looking at the mechanics of it.
So let's look at the confirmation battle surrounding Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche. Very abruptly, Blanche officially scrapped a proposed $1.776 billion compensation fund.
And this fund was for individuals who claim they were victims of political prosecutions.
Yeah, and it was part of a highly controversial settlement involving a lawsuit over Donald Trump's tax returns. It retroactively shielded Trump, his sons, and affiliated businesses from certain past tax claims.
Even though Blanche clarified it wouldn't prevent future entirely new IRS audits, that retroactive shield for past claims was just a bridge too far for some.
But isn't it amazing how quickly a deeply controversial policy vanishes when a job is on the line?
Well, yeah, that is the direct cause and effect of political leverage. Republican Senators John Cornyn and Tom Tillis essentially held up his confirmation vote.
They used their vote as leverage.
Right. Senator Cornyn illustrated their opposition really clearly. He said, and I quote, "This is about making sure that even if you're the President of the United States, you don't get favorable terms from the government in the settlement of a lawsuit that ordinary citizens would not get."
So they yanked the lever, and it worked. Blanche rescinded the payout fund.
But what's fascinating here is what happens when the government decides to dig deep into the archives to find new legal levers to control modern situations.
You're talking about the DOJ prosecuting protesters at ICE facilities.
Exactly. The courtroom is becoming this entirely new front for the immigration debate.
Yeah, the DOJ is not just charging these demonstrators with standard trespassing. They are using a rarely invoked Civil War-era law that makes it a felony to conspire to impede or injure federal officers.
The jump from a trespassing misdemeanor to a federal conspiracy felony is massive.
But what is the legal argument there? How do you go from a peaceful protest to a Civil War conspiracy charge?
Well, laying out both sides neutrally here, the DOJ counters that they are not targeting peaceful protests or First Amendment free speech. They argue they are targeting actual interference and coordinated criminal conduct, like physically blocking transport vans.
Right.
But on the other side, Katie Schwartzman of Protect Democracy argues this is a deliberate attempt to scare Americans and chill free speech.
Because if you know showing up to a protest might get you slapped with a felony conspiracy charge, you are probably not going to show up.
Exactly. The threat of the lever does the work for them.
So up to this point, we focused on people in power successfully pulling levers to control outcomes, right?
Yeah, the illusion that they're in the driver's seat.
But the final stories from Bill Davis's newsletter show us the terrifying reality of what happens when that illusion completely breaks down, when chaos strips away all our control.
Mother Nature being the prime example of that.
The reporting on the wildfires in eastern Washington, particularly around Spokane, is just apocalyptic. We were talking about 60,000 evacuations,
600 structures destroyed.
12 square miles burned, and currently sitting at 0% containment. They even had to evacuate the Spokane VA hospital.
And it's not just Washington. There are catastrophic fires raging in Idaho, Oregon, and a massive blaze in Utah where over 100 cattle were killed.
It's just staggering.
Senator Maria Cantwell was quoted saying, "We are not out of danger." And honestly, we have to recognize that these historic wildfire seasons are just becoming the new normal.
Yeah. Nature does not care about our systems of control. But here's where it gets really interesting and, frankly, infuriating.
The drone incursions?
Yes. During the peak of this emergency response in Spokane, 26 unauthorized civilian drones actually interfered with the firefighting aircraft.
It is unbelievable.
You have a massive natural disaster. The authorities are trying to use whatever levers they have left by dropping water from planes, and human behavior actually compounds the chaos. Because of these drones, the firefighting planes had to be grounded.
It perfectly encapsulates how a loss of control just cascades. Which brings us to the final story in today's deep dive.
Yeah, the shooting in Twin Falls, Idaho.
Because while the fires show us losing control to nature, this tragedy shows the immediate, devastating loss of control caused by human chaos.
At least 3 people were killed, 5 injured, at an In-N-Out restaurant. The suspected gunman was found dead.
And the immediate response from the state was a massive multi-agency push to pull every lever they had to contain the physical space.
Right, they locked down businesses. They even shut down the Perrine Bridge.
But the newsletter editor made this really poignant commentary on the aftermath of these events. He wrote, "The first casualty is certainty."
Because the physical space is only half the battle. Authorities were publicly pleading with people to avoid spreading unverified footage on social media.
Right, and the psychology behind that is profound. In moments of absolute loss control, people desperately rush online to find answers to make sense of the randomness.
But those answers don't exist yet.
No, they don't. So they construct a narrative, even if it's completely false, just to impose some artificial order on a senseless event.
So what does this all mean? We've looked at the threat of military strikes in Iran, billions of dollars moving to save the yen, senators holding up a nomination over a $1.7 billion fund.
The news is driven by people trying to exert control.
Right. But the fires in Spokane and the tragedy in Idaho remind us of the absolute limits of that control.
And for you listening, recognizing this pattern of leverage will hopefully help you read the news differently going forward.
Yeah.
You will start seeing those invisible strings being pulled behind every headline.
When a policy shifts, you start asking, who is pulling this lever?
Exactly. And I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over.
Go for it.
When governments increasingly feel the need to rely on extreme forms of leverage like threatening unprecedented military force or intervening with billions in foreign currency or dusting off laws from the Civil War, does that actually project strength and control?
Or does it signal something else?
Right. Does it actually signal that our traditional, everyday systems of maintaining order are starting to fail?
That is a heavy, fascinating question, and we will leave you to explore that on your own. Thank you so much for joining us as we explored the hidden architecture of today's news. We'll see you on the next deep dive.